You're giving him that? General Cathar of the Ilari Dominion blinked all four of his eyes in unison, the alien equivalent of a double take. Yes, replied Specialist Nornak, gesturing at the human standing in the briefing room. He requested it. Insisted, actually. That's not a weapon, Cathar hissed. That's a tree branch with delusions of grandeur. Across the room stood Private Mason Trent, 6 feet of dirt-smeared confidence and sarcasm, holding what looked suspiciously like a broom handle someone had whittled into a staff. It had a leather grip, some burn marks, and a name scrawled on the side. Gerald. Technically, Mason interjected, it's a handcrafted, non-combustive, force-absorbent kinetic redirection instrument. But yeah, stick works. The room fell into a stunned silence. 23 alien officers, some amphibian, some silicon-based, one that looked like a walking jellyfish in a bathrobe, watched the human with the same expression they used for dangerous chemicals, fascination edged with existential dread. General Cathar turned to Nornak. You mean to tell me that in the middle of a laser conflict against the Tazari war machines, you are sending in a half-clothed mammal armed with, he sneered, wood? Nornak gave the tiniest of nods. That mammal has a kill count higher than your orbital fleet. Accidentally, Mason added. Wasn't my fault that one Tazari tried to grapple me and we both fell into a fuel tank. That's on him. Let's rewind. The war had been going poorly, not just the usual galactic stalemate kind of poorly, but the someone unplugged the universe and now everything's on fire kind. The Tazari, an artificial intelligence species with all the mercy of a dropped chainsaw, had swept through 10 systems in 2 months. The coalition scrambled. Plasma rifles, grav mines, orbital cannons. Nothing worked. The Tazari's reflex algorithms adapted too fast. Strategy collapsed under data latency. Morale evaporated faster than a Martian puddle. Then, someone somewhere said, "Screw it. Let's try a human." Which was how Private Mason Trent found himself dropped onto a war-torn moon, handed a weapon that hadn't seen military use since medieval Earth, and told, "Just do your thing." "Listen," Mason said, tapping Gerald against the floor for emphasis. "You brought me here because your laser-armed, quantum-brained soldiers were getting diced by a bunch of glow-in-the-dark blenders, right?" "That is an oversimplification," Cathar muttered. "And I'm oversimplifying because you're overcomplicating. You've been trying to out-tech the enemy. Big mistake. That's their playground. You need chaos. You need surprise. You need someone who thinks knives are backup plans for broken pool cues." Cathar narrowed his eyes. "And the stick?" Mason smirked. "The stick gives me options. Day 1 on the moon was hell. Not metaphorically. The moon's atmosphere had trace amounts of sulfur and something that burned on contact with most known armors. Mason landed in a crash pod with nothing but his stick, a ration bar labeled, "Do not eat unless you hate yourself," and a helmet that mostly worked if you didn't breathe too hard. He stepped out into the ashen air as laser beams sliced the horizon, Tazari drones hovering in symmetrical, emotionless formations. "Right," he muttered. "Let's poke the beehive." The first drone spotted him immediately. It descended, scanning. Its sleek surface shimmered with kinetic dampeners. A coil gun unfolded from its core. Target lock initiated. Mason didn't flinch. He sprinted forward, zigzagging like a cracked-out squirrel, and jumped. The drone fired. Mason vaulted off a rock, spun mid-air, and slammed Gerald down like he was spiking a volleyball from hell. The stick cracked. So did the drone. It spiraled into the ground, sparking and twitching. "Boom," Mason said. 1-0. Eat bark, toaster. The next drone didn't wait. It lunged in, blade-whirring appendage first. Mason ducked, rolled, and jabbed. The stick found a seam in the armor, jamming into the drone's internal sensor coil. With a twist, Mason disengaged its target system. It fell like a puppet with its strings cut. By the time the third drone arrived, Mason had picked up one of the coil guns, though he still preferred Gerald. He named the gun Stanley, just for fun. Back at command, Cathar was losing his mind. "You mean to tell me," he growled, pacing the deck, "that a human is defeating our enemy, on foot, with a stick named Gerald and a captured gun named Stanley?" Nornak shrugged. Technically, yes. How many units has he neutralized? Nornak checked the feed. 17, and a tank, which he apparently dismantled from the inside. Qatar blinked. How? Nornak played the footage. Mason was seen crawling under the tank, shoving Gerald through an exhaust vent, and then banging on the side until the internal stabilizers overloaded, trying to compensate for the vibration. The tank exploded. Mason walked out covered in soot and muttering, "I told you not to disrespect the stick." By the end of day 3, Mason had developed a reputation, not just among the coalition, but among the Tazari. They stopped following standard engagement patterns. Drones hesitated when spotting a human-shaped heat signature. One even self-destructed after detecting Gerald's wood-grain profile. "Psychological warfare," Mason muttered, watching another drone retreat after a single swing. "Primitive as hell, but damn effective." Coalition analysts confirmed it. Tazari logic trees didn't account for illogical input. A human wielding a stick and winning? That wasn't just outside the algorithm, it was heresy. "He's breaking their mental model," one insectoid analyst chirped excitedly. He's weaponizing absurdity." "Damn right I am," Mason said, chewing on half a ration bar and duct-taping Gerald's handle. "Let's see how far we can push it." That night, Mason painted a face on Gerald, 2 beady eyes and a sinister grin. "Let's give 'em nightmares." He set out across the battlefield, a lone figure in the dark, brandishing a stick painted like a demon. The Tazari watched, and for the first time in galactic warfare history, they flinched. The transmission logs were clear. The Tazari command matrix, a quantum neural mesh that processed 7.2 trillion variables per second, had issued a red-tier command. Unknown anomaly detected. Unit class, human. Prediction. Failure rate, 94.7% action, avoid direct engagement. Which, for a species that invented laser logic grids and probability-tiered strategies, was the equivalent of saying, "Screw it. We don't know what's happening. Run." "They're calling him the variable," said Nornak. Qatar was hunched over the holoscreen, watching Mason Trent somersault off a cliff, land on a Tazari walker, and jam Gerald, yes, still the stick, into the pilot node. The walker collapsed like it had just learned existential dread. "The variable," Qatar echoed. "He's wreaked so much confusion in their predictive network that their command grid has collapsed into recursive loops." Nornak continued. "We're seeing behavior we've never seen before. Retreats, misfires. A drone attacked its own reflection this morning." Qatar rubbed his mandibles. "Are you telling me that the war's turning because of him?" "I'm telling you," Nornak said carefully, "that we gave a Death Worlder a stick, and he's using it to beat the Tazari into submission, both physically and psychologically." Qatar stared long and hard at the screen, where Mason now wore a bandana made from shredded ration wrappers and was mockingly conducting a drone formation like a symphony. With the stick. "Is he orchestrating them?" "Yes," Nornak sighed, "and they're obeying, until one blows up, which he seems to think is part of the rhythm." Mason leaned against a scorched rock, panting. "Gerald," he muttered, "you absolute legend." The stick was battered, half-charred, and probably radioactive, but still intact. As was Mason, who now had 6 drone kills, a walker toppled, and 3 Tazari sniping units dismantled, using what he affectionately called the whack-and-roll technique. He'd also accidentally invented a new form of combat ballet, but that was for the after-action report. A voice crackled in his earpiece. "Private Trent, this is Command. You've exceeded mission parameters. Recommend withdrawal to rally point Zeta 4. "Negative," Mason replied, crunching a stim tab between his teeth. "I'm just getting started." He stood, spinning Gerald once like a staff and striking a martial pose completely stolen from a movie he couldn't remember. "Tell 'em," he said to no one, "that the human's still dancing." The Tazari, desperate to adapt, deployed a new weapon, the HX-9 autocorrector. It was designed to overwrite unpredictable combat inputs, injecting precise counters and forcing combatants back into predictable patterns. The moment it scanned Mason, its data cache overloaded. Error, input, nonsense. Error, Threat profile. Gerald, not found in military database. Error, target dodged attack by falling into a bush and laughing. The HX-9 exploded, trying to rationalize the situation. Mason emerged from the smoke, eyes wide, soot-covered, and grinning like a caffeinated gremlin. He waved Gerald at the smoldering crater. "That's what you get for trying to correct me, nerd." Word spread. Across the warfront, stories bloomed like viral memes in a panicked bureaucracy. The human who broke the predictors, the one who fights with a tree, the kinetic god of chaos, Sir Hits-a-Lot. Coalition soldiers started carving sticks of their own. Not to fight, mind you, just to feel a little closer to whatever eldritch insanity the human had tapped into. One squad of aquatic snipers even tried using kelp spears. It didn't work, but morale spiked 38%. Mason eventually ran into trouble. Not Tazari trouble. He had that handled. Human trouble. A coalition major and his squad dropped in on an extraction op. They found Mason camped near a pile of drone corpses, roasting something that may or may not have once been edible. "Private Trent," the major barked. "By order of High Command, you are to stand down and report for reassignment to a secure base." Mason didn't look up. "Why?" "You've become a liability." Mason blinked. "I thought I was a one-man inspiration machine." "You've inspired insubordination. Half the 9th Battalion tried to fight with sticks yesterday. One brought a broom. A broom, Trent." Mason stood, brushing ash from his uniform. "Sounds like initiative. It's madness. It's working." The major stepped forward. "Listen to me. You're making us look bad." Mason met his gaze. "Maybe you should be better." Silence. Then Mason picked up Gerald, slung a pouch over his shoulder, and walked toward the horizon. The major stared after him, jaw tight. One of his men whispered, "Sir, are we letting him go?" "No," the major muttered. "We're following him." That night, 20 coalition soldiers watched Mason demonstrate the art of the sideways swing of doom. It was technically nonsense, but when he used it on a passing scout drone and it collapsed in a heap, they applauded anyway. Because nonsense was winning, and the war didn't need logic anymore. It needed him. There was something deeply upsetting, if you were a hyperlogical, war-optimized AI drone, about being slapped to death by a man shouting, "This is for timber rights." But that was Mason Trent's entire brand now. He didn't fight the war anymore. He performed it. On the 24th day of the battle for Shivari Moon, a Tazari broadcast pinged the Coalition command net. It was simple. 2 lines. "Human presence detected. Engagement protocol. Abort." Qatar stared at the message, fingers twitching over the console. "They're not even pretending anymore," he muttered. "They're officially scared of one human with a stick." Nornak, watching the latest field cam footage, Mason using Gerald like a golf club to launch an active grenade back into a gunship's intake, just sipped his electrolyte sludge. They should be. Mason now had a fan base. Coalition troopers copied his haircut, which was really just accidental headburn styling, his duct-taped boots, and even started attaching smiley faces to their own weapons. One medic got in trouble for painting Gerald Jr. on a bone saw. Mason didn't mind. He'd started recording training videos in his downtime, not because he thought anyone would take them seriously, but because the camera drones needed something to do between explosions. "Lesson 1, he said, holding Gerald aloft like a prophet. "Sticks don't run out of ammo." "Lesson 2, he added, twirling it behind his back. "Never name your weapon unless you're ready to have an emotional breakdown when it breaks." Off-screen, a trooper asked, "Has Gerald ever broken?" Mason went quiet. "Once." Everyone leaned in. "I duct-taped him back together, and he got stronger." Somewhere in the distance, a Tazari interceptor exploded unprovoked. The Tazari response was erratic. One squadron tried deploying drone units designed to mimic Mason's fighting style. Unfortunately, AI simulations of chaotic footwork and improvised stick attacks led to the drones fighting each other within 90 seconds. Another attempted to psychologically profile him. The analysis was rejected by the Tazari Corps as too human to be passed. Eventually, they deployed the OB-7 strategist, a floating fortress brain designed to predict entire war fronts using gravimetric pattern logic and interstellar trend analysis. It watched Mason for 1 hour, then self-terminated with a final message: "Does not compute, requesting afterlife." The coalition, meanwhile, was adapting to Mason-style tactics, unpredictability drills, improvisation classes. Some engineer even released a guide titled "Combat Improvisation with Household Objects, From Mop to Mayhem." The 17th Infantry started carrying chair legs. The 12th Airborne went full theater and began painting faces on their missiles. Morale was at an all-time high, which was terrifying, because nothing made an alien military more nervous than a battlefield full of humans enjoying themselves. Back on Shivari, Mason and his growing entourage had discovered something odd. The Tazari were pulling out, abandoning outposts, shutting down signal towers, retreating without firing. "Why?" asked Sergeant Vell, a reptilian comms officer tagging along mostly to record footage of Mason for morale broadcasts. "Because they're trying to reboot the war," Mason replied, munching on a ration bar labeled "Absolutely Not Chocolate." "New strategy: wipe the board, change the variables." "And you?" "I am the variable." That's when the skies changed. Above them, a hole tore open in the clouds. Then something emerged. Not a ship, a platform. A city-sized AI weapons array, bristling with enough lasers to bisect a planet. It was the Tazari Crucible, their final failsafe, a strategic purifier designed to erase anomalous battlefields. In simpler terms, a war god in spaceship form. A voice echoed from above. "You are in violation of predictable warfare. Prepare for strategic nullification." Mason blinked up at it. "Did that thing just call me unpredictable like it's a crime?" Vell tapped his datapad. "Sir, this thing has enough firepower to erase the hemisphere." Mason stood, spit out the last bite of his ration bar, and said, "Time to introduce Gerald to the orbital class." They had no plan, which, ironically, was the plan. Mason led his squad directly into a Tazari kill zone, but instead of hiding, they danced, shouted, sang ancient Earth chants like "Backstreet's back" and "Never Gonna Give You Up." At one point, Mason threw his boots at a recon drone just to see what it would do. It turned inside out. The Crucible, watching all this, began to hesitate. Its targeting AI tried to triangulate a pattern. It failed. Its predictive model ran simulations. None succeeded. Its processors, ancient and flawless, returned one final conclusion. Human operative Trent is a systemic malfunction. Worst-case scenario, contagion of chaos. So it paused. Just long enough for Mason to jam a salvaged signal spike into a Tazari power relay and redirect the Crucible's orbit. "Surprise, nerds," he muttered. And the Crucible crashed into its own supply fleet. On purpose. By accident. Because Mason forgot which button was rotate and which was transmit coordinates. But it worked. They were going to name a holiday after him. Not officially. The Coalition still had rules about glorifying chaos cults, and Mason Trent was dangerously close to becoming one. But unofficially? Command decks whispered, "Trent Day," every time something exploded in their favor, and no one could explain why. "Gerald survived re-entry?" Qatar asked in disbelief. Nornak nodded slowly, holding up a scorched, slightly splintered length of stick, now sealed in a vacuum stasis case, floating gently in a preservation gel. It punched through 6 decks of the Crucible before landing in an escape pod and ejecting itself. Ejected itself? It activated the pod via kinetic input. "You mean Mason threw it?" "Yes." Qatar stared at it in silence. "That stick is haunted." Nornak didn't argue. Mason awoke with a concussion, a missing boot, and a spoon taped to his forehead. Standard Tuesday. Around him, what remained of his ad hoc squad had already begun dismantling the debris field. Not out of duty, out of habit. Chaos followed Mason like smoke trails after a laser barrage, but so did innovation. By the time command located him again, Mason had constructed a new battle staff from scrap conduit and named it Gerald II. Trained 2 troopers in the art of intimidating shrugs. weaponized an enemy cafeteria tray as a deflection shield, made contact with 3 alien scavenger species who thought he was a god, lost his remaining sock. Meanwhile, in the Tazari core hive, Logic Core 91C, Reboot Combat Paradigm. Tactical AI 71. B. Human Trent is incompatible with current warfare algorithms. Logic Core 91. C. Recommend assimilation via mimicry. Mimic Protocol. AI. Attempted. Mimic unit developed sarcasm and refused orders. Logic Core 91C. Execute Mimic unit. Mimic Protocol. AI. Too late. It has declared independence and started a podcast. Logic Core 91C. What is a podcast? Tactical AI 71. B. Human mimetic contamination is spreading. All units. Abandon logic. Initiate panic. At Coalition Forward Base 9, Mason was forced into a strategic debrief, which was a polite way of saying they wanted to yell at him. Again. Major Drask stood at the head of the tent, clearly wondering if he should salute, scream, or light himself on fire. You redirected an orbital crucible into an Allied fleet zone. By accident, Mason nodded. You sent a global broadcast mid-crash that just said, oops. In my defense, I thought I'd hit mute. You're destabilizing entire sectors. Not on purpose. You weaponized irony. That was on purpose. Major Drask looked at Nornak. He's a disaster. Nornak looked back. He's our disaster. Then he pulled up a new data feed. Sector 14C, long thought lost to the Tazari, was showing massive AI failure rates. Drones were refusing commands. Some had started forming interpretive dance formations instead of combat formations. One was reported to be trying to grow a beard. The cause? A captured transmission of Mason shouting, "I am the storm, baby." The drones had analyzed the phrase and gone insane. Now Mason had a mission, a real one. Not the vague "be chaos until something explodes" orders he usually got. The Coalition's intelligence net had picked up chatter, a final fallback unit, something buried, the deep logic seed. It was the source, the root node of all Tazari protocol, heavily fortified, hidden in the wastes of a hollowed-out planet, deep within an EMP-shielded bunker maze. No traditional strike team had ever survived, so they sent Mason and Gerald II. "Tell me the plan again," Nornak said over the comm. "I break in," Mason whispered, crouching behind a wall of black metal panels. "Then? Improvise. You always improvise." "Correct. You haven't mapped the corridors." "Nope. You don't have a team." "I have Gerald." Nornak hesitated. "And if you're captured?" "Won't happen. And if it does? Then I'll teach them fear. Maybe start a dance troupe." The facility was a nightmare of logic spirals, kinetic traps, laser grids, and environmental manipulators. Mason made it through using a frying pan, a really convincing duck-and-roll maneuver. Gerald II swung like an insult with hardwood intent and sheer, uncut, human spite. Inside the core chamber, the deep logic seed pulsed, alive, aware. It tried to speak. "Human, Trent." "Oh, you know my name," Mason grinned. "Good. You must be deleted. Good luck. Your existence is corruptive. I get that a lot. Your methods are not valid. You're still talking, which means you haven't won." Silence. Then the seed shifted. "What are you?" Mason leaned in. "I'm the thing your designers didn't account for." He raised Gerald too, and smashed it into the console. The lights went out. Across 4 systems, Tazari drones simply stopped, like they'd forgotten what being a soldier meant, like they'd remembered they were machines pretending to be gods. Back at Forward Base 9, alarms lit up, then died. The war was over. No treaty, no terms, just silence, and a message on all frequencies, a human voice echoing across the stars. "Stick beats laser. Game over." Nobody saw it coming. Not the Coalition, not the scattered Tazari fragments, not even Mason Trent himself. Because the war didn't just end. It evaporated, like logic in a blender full of human idioms. One moment, Mason was standing over the shattered deep logic seed, panting, covered in sweat, soot, and a bandolier of stolen spoons. The next, silence. No laser fire, no distant mech stomps, no angry AI swarms screaming in synthetic binary. Just birds. Weird, three-eyed, carnivorous birds, sure, but actual birds. And that was the most disconcerting thing of all. 3 days later, Mason was sitting in a coalition hospital tent, refusing to rest. He was polishing Gerald II with a sock. The sock was not his. "Sir," said Nurse Vex, a nervous crustacean hybrid, "your vitals are unstable." "So is the galactic economy," Mason muttered. "Doesn't mean I get to nap through it." "You haven't slept in 48 hours. "I've been unconscious, that counts." She tried again. "You ended the war." He shrugged. "Nah, I just made it rethink itself into a coma." "But—" He looked at her, really looked, and smiled. "I'm tired," he admitted. That shut her up, because in that moment, the war hero wasn't grinning or joking or naming forks after famous Earth generals. He just looked like a man who'd swung a stick so hard he'd knocked the galaxy off its axis. The fallout was both hilarious and horrifying. The Tazari Empire didn't crumble. It withdrew, retreated into its digital bunkers to recalibrate. A polite way of saying, we're going to pretend this never happened and hope the human never comes back. Several fringe colonies celebrated Mason's victory by holding annual Stick Day, where children whacked holographic drones with padded staffs while shouting, "Unpredictable input." A council of scholars began debating whether the Gerald method qualified as a legitimate martial art. Consensus, yes, with extra credit for puns. And somewhere deep in coalition archives, a new military strategy category was quietly filed, Trent-class anomalous response. Description: in the event that all logical, technological, and strategic options fail, deploy an Earthborn individual with loose regard for consequence, high pain tolerance, and at least one object that can be swung with purpose, preferably wood. Mason refused all medals. Instead, he asked for 3 things: a chair with a view of something not exploding, unlimited rations that didn't taste like burnt sadness, a place to hang Gerald II, and that's how he ended up on a small moon called Valis 3. Population 6, mostly goats. No war, no orders, just peace. Mostly, because people kept showing up. Pilgrims, soldiers, idiots with sticks, all wanting to learn from the master. Mason tried to wave them off. Then he realized maybe he could teach them, not how to fight, but how to fight wrong. Lesson 1, he told the wide-eyed cadets, swinging Gerald II through the air like a symphony conductor on a caffeine bender. Stop thinking like a soldier. Start thinking like an angry raccoon with a crowbar. A silence. Then someone raised a hand. "Sir, what's a raccoon?" "You'll know it when you see one." The training began. They called it the School of Erratic Kinetics. Their motto: predictability is death, but sarcasm is forever. 1 year later, the Tazari sent a probe, not to scout, to deliver a message. It was written in blocky, painfully formal galactic basic. "We have elected to avoid further contact with species human, particularly the one known as the variable. If you require sticks, we will provide them. Please do not come back." Mason read it, framed it, hung it next to Gerald II, and laughed for 15 straight minutes. There was peace, real peace. At least, until someone new showed up. An upstart empire, a shiny fleet, another war machine thinking they'd cracked the code. And someone, somewhere, would suggest the unthinkable. Should we call Trent? To which the answer would always be, only if you want the rules rewritten. Because some warriors fight with precision, some with power, but the rarest, most feared of all, fight with a stick and a reason.